tell me who you are and where you're coming from.
My name is Cindy Vestergaard. I'm a senior associate at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., and now also a visiting fellow here at the Center for International Security Studies.
So tell me why you're here and what you hope to accomplish while you're here.
We're looking at international nuclear safeguards, so how states meet their obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, specifically the starting point of safeguards. So the point at which states are obligated to report on materials in the nuclear fuel cycle.
So tell me why come to Australia to do this?
Well, in part because you have a very cool researcher here, Justin Hastings. He's been working on international illicit proliferation networks. And we're hoping by merging our two brains, me on the front end of the fuel cycle and on the civilian side, and then him with the proliferation networks, that we can come together and look at what is the proliferation risks or the proliferation potential when it comes to the front end of the fuel cycle, and why safeguards or more safeguards, the clarifications that the agency are having, will actually address that.
So tell me a little bit more about the field research and what you hope to accomplish when you're out in the field. How did you first get on to this particular research area?
For 3 years, I led the Governing Uranium Project when I was at the Danish Institute for International Studies. So from 2013 to 2016, looked at 15 countries, how they governed the front end of the fuel cycle, mining, milling, conversion, representing 85% of global production and 70% of consumption.
And Australia in particular has facilities that you're interested in? And
Australia is the third largest producer of uranium. It's also the country that has the largest reserves of uranium. And their role, not only in terms of a producer, but also in terms of their involvement with the IAEA in developing international safeguards, nuclear safeguards over the history of the IAEA. They've always had a prominent role. So here, and also industry has a prominent role, and their engagement in safeguards is actually also what we consider kind of the uranium gold standard.
So who does Australia sell the uranium to?
They sell it to everybody. So they have customers in Europe, the United States, recently India, a more controversial one, United Arab Emirates now, and also they would sell to Japan, South Korea. So they have a large network of what's called nuclear cooperation agreements, and they would then provide materials under those agreements.
Now, are these for the most part bilateral, or are there certain alliance requirements that kick in?
Nuclear cooperation agreements are bilateral. So they are agreed. They're basically trade agreements between country A and country B. There are sometimes trilateral kind of mechanisms that are set up, and then of course the IAEA is engaged in those.
Right. Now you're branching off as well and looking at weapons of mass destruction that aren't necessarily nuclear. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing recently about North Korea and its attempt to get rid of some of its dissidents.
So overall, I deal with W&D governance, and within that, of course, there is the Chemical Weapons Convention, and then, of course, its implementation. More recently, we used to think that chemical weapons were in the dustbin of history, and then after Syria, that's clearly not the case. And also now with North Korea, there is a signal that it's not only still a weapon now in the 21st century, but it's spreading. So we have this case where two women have been alleged to have cloths that are doused in some type of, whether it be precursors or VX itself, on the Supreme Leader's half-brother, North Korea's Supreme Leader's half-brother. And he died within half an hour. And it was VX nerve gas, which is the deadliest of all the nerve agents.
Sounds like very nasty stuff. How did they get hold of it or manufacture it?
That's a good question, and that's what the investigation will have to show. There are some that are suggesting it was two precursors, so each woman had different precursors on their hands, so when they came together on his face, it would have mixed and become VX, and therefore he had the reaction, whereas the second woman would have had more of a reaction than the first. It still doesn't answer a lot more questions that we have. For example, were both women given a pre-treatment? Were they given an antidote? That would also suggest that at least they wanted the co-conspirators wanted them to live enough to do the deed, if not walk away from it. But my sense is that there's probably more collateral damage to the actual mission itself. How would they get a hold of it? If North Korea has been suspected to have a chemical weapon stockpile, upwards of 5,000 metric tons, that includes VX and sarin and other nerve agents. And in fact, that's supposed to be considered or thought to be one of the biggest aspects of their program is nerve agents.
Now, what kind of, say the evidence comes back saying, yes, indeed, this is a nerve gas attack. Legally, what are the possible, retaliatory mechanisms? But do you see other possible retaliations in the future?
Well, according to the first preliminary sample, it is VX. It would be prudent to have international collaboration on that, so or another sample. So, for example, from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, there are two international aspects of law here. One is the Chemical Weapons Convention, which Malaysia is a party to. So through that, it can request assistance to the Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, and then they can help out. This is something that we have precedence with when it comes to Syria. But North Korea is actually not a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention. But it is actually a party to the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which prohibits the use of chemical and biological weapons. Through that, Malaysia or any other UN member state can actually ask the Secretary General of the UN to trigger what's called the Secretary General's mechanism for looking at to investigate cases of alleged use. And that is actually what happened first. The first inquiry in Syria was that.
We've had sanctions against North Korea. Do you think sanctions work?
I think that in some respects, there are aspects of the sanctions that are actually now becoming more brutal than they ever were before. And I think that'll take some time for us to see what's happening there. There's a new report that's going to be forthcoming. There's a lot about it in the news right now. A UN report that says at how prolific North Korea is at evading sanctions. It uses a system of brokers, illicit networks, and also and it still has access to the international financial banking system. So that also has kind of helps them along. Mm-hmm. So we still have a lot of gaps, I think, to address when it comes to North Korea. And certainly, I think after this, there needs to be much more. At least we need another UN Security Council discussion on this.
Well, what do you hope to accomplish while you're here? And besides an article with Justin, what else would you like to see come out of your time in Australia?
A few articles. So in terms of the background, the histories, the field research will be done, more of it will be done here as well. I've already done some field research in Brazil, Canada, hopefully in Europe next. So from that, there should be 3 pieces that will be coming out, including the article with Justin.
So when you go out and do your field research, let's walk us through. What does it involve?
It involves contacting industry, telling them that I'd like to pop by. Also, of course, with officials, so government representatives, not just industry representatives. Starts off with just an email and then popping over to the office. Hopefully a tour of a mine or a mill occasionally is also a nice thing.
Do you get to wear one of those really cool
radioactivity
dosimeters badges?
Yes. Uh-huh. So yes, you are given a dosimeter. Yeah. And a hard hat.
And a hard hat. Good. We want photographs we can put up on our website. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you hope to collaborate with others while you're here?
I will be at the Australian National University in Canberra, talking on the history of the starting point, and also governance of uranium. In May, I'll be at the University of Melbourne, also discussing the history of the starting point of safeguards. So there will be a few collaborations with other universities and other great minds, of course, of Australia as well, and those who are looking at the nuclear fuel cycle.
Now, our field, be it international relations, international security, love to have little pigeonholes. And what box do you see yourself in when it comes to, label or method? You mentioned label. You mentioned methods. What do you see yourself as? Do you self-identify in one of these boxes?
No, I think the one that I would put myself in quite firmly would be just policy. So a policy wonk, I guess, in many respects. That I look at the constellation of choices that governments have before them and help to kind of tease them apart and study those options. It's up to them how things are going to be done. I think one of the most difficult decisions for any politician is how to keep the lights on.
So you managed to go to Copenhagen and escape without becoming a securitization scholar.
Exactly. Well, in WMD is already securitized. It's hard to make it more securitized. It is geopolitics at its best, at its worst. So it's, I think, in that area of it's much more policy oriented. I wouldn't call myself theoretically robust.
You're not a Weaverite.
No.
So, yeah, it'd be really hard to desecuritize WMD.
Yeah. Just to securitize it again. Yeah.
Exactly. Good.